All right, so just a quick summary of what we're going to be covering today. We'll look at the approval of meetings from minutes from last week. They have not been circulated, but I don't think there's anything controversial on them, so I'll have a quick look at those. Then Tor and Michael are going to be talking about the Spark survey briefly. And then Brett is going to give us an in-depth dive into ballot logistics. A deep and fascinating discussion that I'm sure you will enjoy. And then finally, Andy and Angus are going to have a bit of a discussion around the next eRequesting priorities, which are tasks, which are a really critical part of taking the work that we've done around a service request and making it functional and a deliverable solution. Finally, Michael's going to spend some time talking about the upcoming connectathon, so that should be interesting too. All right, so let's have a really quick look at the meeting minutes for last week. I dropped these into the chat before. I'm afraid I forgot to circulate them, and I do apologise, but I don't think there's anything too controversial in these ones. Michael gave a progress checkpoint update and led some discussion around the DI mappings. And then Brett did some final system obligations work relating to the server and client roles. And then finally, there was an eRequesting IG walkthrough from Brett as well. So that's all fairly straightforward. I am going to run a quick vote on that. If you would like to motion to approve those, please let me know and I can run it.
I'll motion to approve them, Chris.
Thanks, Angus. Would anyone like to second that motion?
I'm happy to second, Jane.
Thanks, Jane. All right, should see a poll on your screen now. All right, we'll close that one in a moment. 3, 2, 1. And those minutes are approved. 21 for, no negative, 14 against. All right. So I'm going to pass over to Tor and Michael Hosking. You guys here?
Sorry, Chris, it was 14 abstain, not against.
Oh, sorry, yeah, 14 abstained. Thanks, Michael.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I can't turn my camera on at the moment, unfortunately, so I apologise for that. So I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Tor. I've just joined the Spark team as a project engagement lead. And so just wanted to take some of your time today to advise the TDG members that we would like to send out a survey. The aim of the survey is to try and get an understanding from the AU eRequesting community regarding what artifacts or materials are needed to support the adoption and the use of the FHIR value sets for pathology and radiology. This survey will have an open-ended due date at this point, as we will collect and monitor the responses over time, and hopefully we'll be able to use any responses to the survey to inform further discussions and workshops on this topic in future. There will be a breakout session as an FYI on this topic at the connectathon next week, and we are wanting to incorporate and inform any discussion at that breakout session using any responses, but also acknowledging that going forward we'll continue to monitor the survey as well. So just to reiterate that it's trying to enhance our understanding of the requirements for supporting the use of the national terminology catalogues for pathology and radiology. And that's sort of it. We will aim to send out the survey to the members of the TDG by the end of this week. So that should be coming through to your emails, hopefully. So keep an eye out.
Thank you, Tor. All right, I think we're going to hand over to Brett. Brett, would you like to pilot for this section?
Yeah, I'll probably take over and do that. That's just a bit easier.
Okay.
I think you'll have to stop. Yeah, cool. me go to the right screen. Hopefully you can see the right screen, but logistics.
We can.
Excellent. So so this will be a bit of a quick run through, and it's mainly just to
Sorry,
facilitate.
you're just really difficult to hear, Brett. Are you able to speak up?
Sorry, I'll try and adjust. Is that any better? Or worse?
No, you're still very quiet to me.
Yeah, you're clear, Brett. You're just very quiet, like you're a long way from the mic.
Very quiet. 1 second.
Brett, there is a Zoom has a mic volume setting in its settings as well. Sometimes that can be turned down.
Yeah, let me just work on that. Sorry. Just try and adjust that.
We can hear the dog though. Is the dog got the microphone?
Yeah, the dog's much louder than me.
Not too bad. Maybe just talk loud.
Let's try this. I've put it on automatic, so hopefully that will help a bit.
That's much better.
Excellent. Cool. Excellent. So so basically this was to facilitate especially just introducing terminology and some of the words we'll hear as part of the ballot process. So it's a bit about the process, and this is essentially HL7 process. How the ballot voting works and how the ballots that voting gets resolved. So really it's just a bit of a operational, give you some operational understanding of how the process works, but also it is really pretty high level, and we will obviously be facilitating this process through, especially this time around with the draft for comment process that we've got for eRequesting. So so there will be plenty of opportunity to ask questions and do things. So through this, if you have questions, please just jump in and we'll try and answer them on the fly, and we'll just take it from there. So my dog's going off. The process we're going through is essentially HL7 Australia a balloting process. So there's a set of governance and sort of definitions on how that works. So there's some references there. I invite you to read them. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but really there's a governance process on how this runs, and so the things I'm presenting here are coming from that process, and as if you are an HL7 Australian member, of course you can feed back into that process and highlight things that are issues or problems with that. Essentially we're trying to operate with that methodology, so it gives us a framework to kind of do this work. So for eRequesting, we're at a ballot for comment ballot. So really for comment ballot is really to seek feedback. So what we've done is we've had some discussions, made some decisions. The committee's kind of put out a specification that's got some content in it. So what we're trying to do now is get a formal review of that. So that, as a point in time. So we've got a snapshot that's been published. If you've signed up to that, you'll have those details. The ability to feedback is really important in terms of getting that formal feedback. The balloting process is really designed to have a formal opportunity for people to feedback and ensure that the committee is going to look at all of that feedback as part of the process. So you can raise issues against this specification anytime, and that's up to the committee to decide how they deal with those. But in a ballot process, every vote needs to be addressed and looked at as part of a reconciliation process. So it gives a chance to sort of broaden that. It also means we're kind of inviting people outside of the committee to really take a look at it and provide their feedback. So it does also let us clarify some of our ideas and spot problems that you think may have been introduced as part of the decision-making process, and obviously point at gaps. I think we all know that there's much more work to do, and there's things to do that we kind of know are coming. So whilst it's it's kind of fine to point those things out. Really, the actions will be that we will continue our committee work and work on those new things. So, it's really just to give a chance. Primarily, it's really to get good feedback as to what's being published and see if there's any issues or problems with that. So, or you think there's anything that's been created that is really a problem. So, for comment ballot 2, there's no intent that after this whole process that we will actually publish this version of the ballot for ballot of the Fire IG for actual use. You can happily use it as it is right now, but we won't be publishing a version 0.10 of the ballot that is for use in the wild. We expect to go around again to produce another version, continue the work and move towards having an R1, which is like our first approved working standard. So you'll see at the bottom there's some levels there. For comment is really soliciting feedback. Informative is more just a placeholder kind of concept, not often actually done. Working standard or standard for trial use is another alternative wording people have, is really where we've got a working version of a standard. We expect people to implement it, trial it, use it, in anger, and and offer feedback as part of that process. And then once that sort of standard is really bedded in, there's good implementation. Broadly, you can move towards a normative standard, which is really now this is the standard way of doing things and has the kind of full force of a standard. So we're early on in the process in terms of ballot for comment. So in the process, we have a sign up, a ballot period that runs where we have an open ballot where voters can vote. So that's actually opened now. So we've started that. It will end on in September, so 8th of September, where the ballot will close, which means no more voting can happen. And there will be a reconciliation process where the committee now needs to deal with the feedback that's come through and be dealt with, and we're kind of going to go through some of that process. And at the end of it, we probably will produce a snapshot, which has all those corrections in it, and essentially that's a working version. But depending on timelines, that decision might change. So we might decide that we want to instead have a reconciliation and actually add more material and then publish a version after that. So that's yet to be decided really, but there's some intent there that we'll probably just try and reconcile all the things we have in our feedback and decisions that get made out of the ballot process and actually have a version that is reflecting that, just for reference really, to say this was the outcome of the ballot process. So we have 77 individual people registered to vote in the eRequesting ballot. So we have 19 individual members and 18 organisations represented. So there's a reasonable participation there. I think there'll be more ballots in the future. So if you've missed out signing up for this one, there will be a ballot. We probably expect there to be a ballot around February next year, and some more later in the year. So there will be a chance for to feedback into this formally as well. And it's really important right now that we are at draft for comment level. So really we're looking for information and improvement and trying to settle down the material in a meaningful way. This is not like the end of the world. There is plenty of opportunity to feedback into this again, right? So it's really a good chance to really improve the quality through a process. We also have our other specs going through ballot at the same time. So we have AU base, where there are some dependencies on AU base and AU core in eRequesting. So it's worth having a look at those specs, especially where you see where we've referenced them. I think there's plenty of work still that needs to kind of happen around some of the material in those specs in terms of how it helps eRequesting, or it gets we will probably do work on how it's used in eRequesting. But there is also, if you have signed up for those ballots as well, you can directly comment on that. But even if you have only signed up for eRequesting, if you are addressing something in those specs, it will get addressed through the process of managing the ballot reconciliation. So yeah, feel free to go through deep into the things we refer to in eRequesting and then actually comment on how they affect the requesting world. Cool. So when you are participating in the ballot, you have an overall voting status. Now, this is not so important for draft for comment because whether it's we don't really need to pass the ballot in terms of have everyone agree on all the content. We probably don't expect that. So there's no having a positive or negative ballot is really not the point of a draft for comment. It's more to get actually issues raised and understood. But just to give a picture of what that means, there is a vote status that you have as an overall individual voter. So no vote, it just means you have not voted yet. There's been no activity basically, and you don't have any vote recorded. You can formally abstain, which means you are intentionally not going to vote. So effectively, you're opting out of the process. You're counted in the quorum in terms of the total number. The quorum doesn't really matter for draft for comment because we don't need to sort of pass any levels to kind of approve anything. So if you decide that you won't get a chance to do this, or there's nothing you have to say, you can choose abstain, and that will just leave you with no vote effectively. And then we have an affirmative or negative status. So affirmatives are really there's that you have feedback. You can directly vote affirmative on a spec and say everything is good here. Which I find unlikely at this stage. So you're probably not going to do that. But you may have a set of issues that you are considering minor issues that wouldn't really stop the ballot, the publication proceeding. Draft for comment's a little bit different. So really, it's more just highlighting things in draft for comment. So whether you choose affirmative or negative is really up to you. But it does give an indication that you think this is a minor issue that wouldn't really affect publication, or you think it's a major issue that changes what the meaning or the usage of the specification. So that it does help sort of triage these things and give us some understanding. So if you are raising negative ballots for this thing, you have to raise issues, right? So there's no way to just vote negative, right? You have to actually raise an issue and say what the problem is to have a negative vote. And if you have any issues raised that are negative, you are recorded as an overall negative position, right? So this is kind of just automatic things that the tools manage. When you are raising issues, so these are just some types of issues. So this is helpful also in sort of working out what kind of issue we're looking at and how we work with it. A change request is really an actual change to the content. So you expect that what you are requesting will change the meaning, purpose, usage, understanding of what the material is. So really that's an indication that you want something to be changed, right? So it's not suitable to publish the specification that way, and you want to actually change the content. Technical corrections are more around minor changes that really won't affect the usage that much. So things like typos, grammar, layout, formatting, things like that would be really good to, bad wording, in sentences and things like that. So they're things that would improve the quality of the publication, but really don't affect how it's used, in a really adverse way. So that's really useful as well for us sort of categorizing things and helping deal with information. Questions and comments are really not requesting changes at all. We kind of probably dissuade people from using those options in terms of issue types. You can just raise an issue anytime with a question or a comment. We probably prefer people to contact the TDG if you have a question or a comment. And unless it's something you really want to raise as part of the ballot, process and timeline, you would kind of say, well, there's no point in doing that because you're not actually requesting anything to be different. Although we do appreciate great job comments, so that's always nice. Okay, so when you raise specific issues against the ballot, so there's there's you have to vote either negative, on it, or positive, affirmative, right? So basically, the key thing is if you're voting affirmative on an issue, you've got an issue, but you are comfortable that the specification will proceed to publication. So basically, if you see a typo, it's not going to really mess with anyone that it's spelled wrong. Somebody implementing it's really going to make no difference. So if it didn't get fixed, that would be okay. Or you don't like the wording, in a sentence, if it got changed, it would be better, but it wouldn't mean you should hold up the publication to change that sentence, right? So that's the ability to kind of highlight minor issues and let that kind of be resolved as part of the process. Negative issues are important things, right? So basically, you don't think this spec can be published unless this is addressed. So if you think there's something there that is wrong, incorrect, doesn't work, isn't suitable for the operation of this spec, that's where you raise a negative. And in draft for comment, you can be quite scathing with this stuff because we will just be improving the content. So go with that. If you're kind of looking at more publishing for a working standard level, that's where you really want to think about it, whether you want to hold up publication for this. There is a chance to reconcile things, but if you think there's really a problem, you should be raising a negative and let people know that you don't think you should publish it this way because there's a real issue. So that's just, if you're voting on a specific thing. Okay, I just want to highlight too, so we'll have a quick look at how it looks in the tools, but that'll be really brief. But there is a session tomorrow where we're going to spend an hour actually going through Jira, the general process, but also the Jira tool itself and how that works. There is some online video of screen recordings of going through the process with some explanations and some explanation pages already available in Confluence, but and YouTube. But we'll go through a session that's you can do Q&A and actually go through things. So that'll be on tomorrow at noon. Links there, so we'll get that out, make sure that goes out. So I'll just quickly bring up what it looks like in the tool. So this is actually I'm not logged in. I'll log in for good measure. Just jump across there. Okay. If I get logged in, that would be better. So you do need to have an account to get in. If you are registered, even if you don't think you've got an account, I believe we had checks in that you needed to have an account to register, but if you didn't think you have one now because they set one up for you if you are on the list. So with this, we've got, okay, here we go. So down here, we've got our particular ballot definition. So that gives us, this is actually our ballot entry. So we've got, there's a number of specifications under ballot. We're in the middle of the HL7 international ballot period as well. So there's a bunch of international ballots in there. But that link gives us a link to the eRequesting ballot. We've got our 77 eligible people registered. There's in the issue links here, there's a list of everyone who's registered. So everyone has an entry that's been signed up. So there's everyone there. That's attached to your login and account. So you can happily go into that and see your current status, like I haven't voted, and from here I can go and create issues from here. So I can create change requests or technical corrections. I recommend coming tomorrow if you want to kind of go through that in detail, but that's the same as raising any issue against an IG. Once that issue is there, you can then vote on that issue. So, from the top level, I can approve the spec or abstain. But if I want to raise a negative issue, I have to go through the process of raising an issue. So I can go and get in there, create an issue, and then vote on it. So so there is a process attached to that. I have been sending out links to the people that signed up the ballot link. Every email had a link to the material on how to vote, in terms of screenshots and the material supporting, but we are having that session tomorrow. So it'd be good to come along to that if you want to go through it step by step.
So
cool.
Brett, a quick question. You have, the previous screen has two options to click. One is a change request, the other one is technical correction.
Yeah.
What do people do if they want just to pose a question or make a comment?
Yeah, you can happily you can happily just create an issue. So if you want to do a question or a comment, so if I did I close it? There you go. So if I say create an issue, I can just create an issue anytime. So this is like not going, trying to go through an issue. You can happily pick the type of issue. So at that point, you can pick question or comment in that issue. So we can do that. So basically, I can raise a comment. I think I'll just put it against. Yeah, you have to actually raise it against the specific specification. So eRequesting is in here. I'll try it. So once you do that, you have to pick a version. Our ballot's listed, so you can happily go through and create an issue. So we'll just do a test one. So once we've done that, I think that's like, something. Oh yeah. Yeah, there's advice along the way too. So saying before I submit a comment, just put it on chat, put it on Zulip instead, because it's not that important.
I mean, some of this I think you're going through tomorrow, so I don't think we really need to go through the detail today.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you can happily vote on that, as well. So it's so there basically any issue. If there's an existing issue, you can also vote on it. We'll go through that tomorrow. There's a few options on the way to drive it. Cool. So I will continue on. So that's on tomorrow at noon. So from that process, like essentially the issues get raised. There's all of those are logged, and it's up to then the co-chairs to start managing that stuff. So the co-chairs will go through things, triage all the issues and comments once the ballots, once they're recorded, and you're then able to just deal with those appropriately. Part of that process is things like technical corrections can be dealt with directly by co-chairs. They're obvious fixes. Co-chairs can decide to fix them. Doesn't really need the TDG to be involved. You can just go ahead and get those things done. If things require approval, so they're actually changes to specification, change requests that come through, those things will get managed through a TDG process. So there's a few options. We'll go through that. But before you get to the voting part, the co-chairs will make some kind of reconciliation where they'll have a recommendation, try and explain things so that's easy to digest for the TDG, and also start doing things like grouping things together that are similar, finding duplicates, and doing all the work that kind of goes around managing those issues that are coming in. So really, the co-chairs will prepare that stuff to be consumed by the TDG. And it'll be presented back in a few different ways to approve or discuss and to find out what the answer is. But the co-chairs hopefully will get through the things that are straightforward or are well understood. A lot of the things that can be dealt with and prepared for the TDG quite directly by the co-chairs. The TDG members have to eventually approve, either agree with those dispositions, come up by the co-chair, or work through a committee process to come to a final position, and that will then get recorded as that will get voted on, and that will then be finalised as the outcome of the reconciliation for that issue. So at that point, the thing's been resolved. So you may agree that there's a change that needs to be made, that will get made or partially made, partially implemented, or decide that maybe that's not a good idea, what you've raised there as an issue. and there's an opportunity at that point for the person that voted to withdraw that vote. So if they agree with the outcome, they're happy with that, or they're happy with that the resolution was, to their satisfaction or fair and reasonable, they can withdraw that vote. So it means if it's a negative vote, they can withdraw it, and that becomes an affirmative vote where they've accepted the outcome. And at the end of the day, you count the negatives and the positives in terms of the individuals, and you work out where you are in terms of the approval. So at that point, it is possible that if a ballot's not passed, it might require reballoting again. So so just in terms of triage, I'll just keep this pretty brief, but in reality, there's all different kinds of issues. So they range from substantial changes that are needed in the substantive changes that are needed in the specification to other more minor things like editorial and information or additional explanations and things like that. So that basically the co-chairs will kind of work through that and categorize things and work that out. It is possible things are out of scope for e-requesting. So essentially you've pointed out an issue that's really in another specification, and that may be in the fire specification itself or in our AU base specs or AU core if we're referring to it. So at that case, we'll have a pathway to raise issues against those specifications, or in our ballot period, we can pass those issues across to the other committees to deal with. So if it's an AU base issue, it will come to the fire work group to deal with, and if it's an AU core issue, it'll end up in the AU core TDG to deal with. So there is a co-chair level thing where things can be put out of scope if it's not really relevant to e-requesting directly, or there's no ability for e-requesting to solve that problem because it's in another specification. And basically there's an outcome against each issue, so we can find your issue persuasive. We'll change, like you said, persuasive with mod, so that's modification. So we agree with what you're saying, but we want to solve it in a different way than you suggested, or partially, or in some alternative manner. So that's just to indicate we agree, but we've decided to solve it some other way. Non-persuasive, which means we don't agree with what you're saying, and there'll be a rationale for that provided. And there's also kind of a consider for future use. If you've pointed out something where there's no material or nothing to work with, or it's really new work or needs considerable piece of work to address, it may be marked as consider for future use. So we're basically pushing that out into the next cycle, and we have to kind of then address it as work beyond the ballot. So we're not going to solve it in this round, is all that's saying. Yeah, so that's an option as well for co-chairs. And that's especially for things that we know are not complete, or we know need significant work to complete. So just out of scope things, there is the ability to move these things to other specs. That includes even things like that. We have AU templates there, and you might not know what those are. That's actually formatting tools, and how the IG gets presented and layouts are built around these templates. So if you see strange layout things, it might end up being a template problem, not a content problem for e-requesting. So that's just an option. Triages, basically I kind of spoke to this already, but it's worth pointing out, this is where things get organized, things that can be solved. The technical corrections directly don't need TDG's involvement. Priorities, grouping of things that are similar. And the idea is here to kind of get things into blocks that can be understood. So if there's a bunch of things that are common or somehow related or generally can be dealt with together, we'll try and block them up into a set of things. So people can look at maybe 10 issues or something and go through them and approve the whole set. And usually that's things that are pretty non-controversial or well understood, and if you are happy with the content there in a block, we'll send out a block, have a block vote on that, which may happen in committee but may be via other methods like e-vote. So we may do that online as well. So the methodology might be different depending on what it is, but that'll be part of the TDG work. So those things will get announced as part of the TDG meetings and teed up, and if there's anything there that people, if there's particular issues people think shouldn't be in that block because there's more to discuss and things like that, that's an opportunity to kind of feed back into that process. But what that's doing is trying to accelerate the reconciliation process, not have to have a vote on every single issue. So depending on how many get, that might be 100, right? So that might take a long time. So by blocking these things up, it actually helps get through the resolution more quickly. But we really do want people to look at it and not just agree. And then if you see something that you don't agree with, then yeah, that's it. You should raise that. Yep. So it is possible too. There will be specific issues that we know need discussion, so we'll probably bring those individually to the TDG. So co-chairs can probably pick some of those, but those can also be highlighted if you see something that you think is really much more needs discussion. It shouldn't be in a block vote. Yeah, you can certainly do that. And basically, like the co-chairs prepare all that, so hopefully we'll lead everyone through those blocks and process in terms of what has to happen with those things. So basically, as a TDG member, you need to look at this stuff and decide where you sit on it. It has all the same voting requirements of any decision in the TDG. So we need enough people to agree, and also we want to really get a consensus position on things. So obviously, if there's a number of people raising negative responses to these things for reasons, like that's something we probably need to look at, and that's up to sort of the co-chairs to manage. And yeah, we can work through that stuff. This is more about co-chair, so this is really like co-chair business. You got to organize stuff, organize the blocks, let people know what's happening, all the things you'd expect, and also record all the outcomes. These will all be have formal vote counts and everything recorded against them. We can't actually move things through the tooling without having votes and outcomes to record. So it would all be minuted, and it'll all be recorded in our balloting tools as well in terms of the process that we're following. So that's more detail on the different kinds of results, right? So you can have in the voting. So I went through that kind of before. So basically, there's you agree, pushing it off in the future. You don't agree, you agree somewhat, and you're going to change it some way. Duplicates will be highlighted. So if you have an issue that's marked as a duplicate, there'll be a reference to another issue that's essentially covering the same content. So effectively, that issue's being solved, by the resolution of another. And there is the ability to retract something. So at any point, a voter can decide to retract their vote and say, "I've changed my mind. I don't think that's a problem." Basically, you think that that's not really an issue, or you understand that what you asked for doesn't make sense, right? Which I've done plenty of times. So block voting, so I talked about that a little. So basically, we will try and block things together so that we can deal with things more quickly. E-votes will be a thing. So we will set up some of those blocks and get people to vote on them through an e-vote process. I'm not sure we've done many e-votes in the eRequesting group yet. So, but there is a mechanism to vote in Confluence, which lets you essentially log into Confluence, record an e-vote. There is an option to refer to Telecon, which means you think this needs further discussion, and essentially the TDG is obliged to take your refer to Telecon to discuss that particular issue. So if you want, if you think there's something there that needs discussion in that block, that can be done. It may need that particular issues have to get taken out of the block so we can approve the rest of the things, and then those single issues will get handled differently. So there's a process there that lets you kind of manage that, but basically, again, we're talking about a TDG vote that's formal, right? So we need to actually vote on all of the content, and so every issue will be seen, and that's what you get when you participate in the ballot. Is your issue will be dealt with as part of the ballot. Either it may be formally pushed off into the future, but we will formally look at it and make sure that we deal with it. It is possible to withdraw votes. So once things are resolved and have gone through decision making, there's opportunity to withdraw your vote. So if you're happy with the outcome, they said, yes, it's persuasive, I'm going to change it. Well, I go, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. I don't need to vote negative anymore. I know it's going to be fixed. So that's a good answer. Or the other option is that if you really think it's still a problem, you can leave your vote negative, and effectively you end up having a negative vote in the ballot. Essentially the TDGs work through the consensus process to decide what to do with it. Once you do withdraw your ballot, your issue vote flips from negative to affirmative if you do withdraw. So that's working towards your overall status. If you have no negatives left, you've decided to withdraw all your negatives and you're happy with the outcome for all of those, your overall vote will flip from negative to affirmative. So you'll end up having an affirmative vote on the whole specification. So draft for comment, it's more important if you're trying to approve something, but for draft for comment, whether the ballot has passed or failed is like there's a level to do that. That's much more important for working standards and normative standards, where you really want to say we all approve this content, or at least to a certain level, 60% or 75% approve of this content as it is. For draft for comment, we don't even really assess that. Really, we're looking for the issue content, so we don't actually essentially have to pass anything, because we're not going to put that out as a usable specification as a working standard or a normative standard. So really, at this stage, doesn't really matter if you end up with a negative vote, because you will get a chance to go around again, and eventually we'll be voting on a working standard level. So that's just a link to where there's a reconciliation area in Confluence. So that's where all the ballot issues will be listed, grouped, block votes prepared, their current status, the co-chair's preliminary dispositions, the final dispositions after voting's happened, and essentially that will have a listing of everything in terms of where we're at with all of the issues. So that's really, hopefully gives you a bit of an overview of where we are. There'll be blocks that are active, blocks that are coming in the future. So that's kind of a good place to look into if you want to sort of find your issue for a start and where it is and which block it's in, and also just to see the outcomes of everything at the end of the day. So that's that. So I think that's it for me. I will invite questions. But yeah, tomorrow will be another opportunity if you can make that 12 o'clock session. You can. We'll go through. I'll go through some of those issue raising things in Jira and try and cover those things off. If there's specific questions, there's a whole bunch of interesting things like being able to do group votes inside organizations and things like that. So there's a few things there that are possible with the tooling. But so yeah, I'm very happy to field that tomorrow. Thanks,
Great.
Chris.
Thanks, Brett. Awesome. Okay, I think we're going to hand over to Andy Bond and Angus Miller to talk about next AU eRequesting priorities.
Yeah, I think I'll start. I don't know. Michael, did you have your slide?
Yeah, Chris, can you share that? Back to share.
I'm not actually sure what's on this slide, but I think I'll start here and then we'll just switch to me sharing. Right.
It's that's all that's on it.
Yep. So I guess what we wanted to do was to just start raising again the discussion around the task resource. We had quite a bit of discussion about task resources quite some time ago, about 2 months ago. And then they kind of went off the boil and we started concentrating and doing our waves through the service request resource, because really that's where the meat of the sort of clinical request is. But we haven't forgotten about task. Task is still required, or at least in our view. And now that we've got service requests sort of laid down at our sort of alpha version, I think over the next couple of weeks, and maybe for more advanced people in the connectathon, we're going to start up again looking at task, and we'll probably do a wave thing through task, walking through each element as to which elements we must support and whatnot. So I think here we just wanted to, before the connectathon, just re-raise task again and just sort of do a bit of a summary and overview of it again, of what it is and why we think it's needed. So I think I'll share my screen now. Got the presentation from Ray Sponk there. So I'm going to put that in chat. Chat. Where is chat? Can't find the chat window.
I've stuck it in there, Angus.
Have you? Thank you. Thank you. So there's a link there to a video done by Rene Spronk, who's a guy from somewhere in Europe who knows a lot about fire, and he does this great presentation about task and sort of what it's used for. Why and I think it's about 30 minutes. I'd highly advise people to watch that video. For me personally, task was a bit foreign when I first heard about it. Watching this video really made the penny drop for me. I think you'll get more out of that video than you'll get out of me in the next 20 to 30 minutes, just in understanding. So that's highly recommended. I'll share my screen. So can you see my screen? Are we looking at a web page?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So we're at the fire spec. I'll go right back to the beginning of just where have I gone here. So if we go right to the home page, we've got documentation and this fire workflow here. So it's worth reading this page about fire workflow. It's really going to describe to you what task does and fire's sort of view of when you would use task. It has this definition of sort of 3 different groups of resources, if you will, like definition resources, request resources, and event resources. Definition resources is something we're not really covering. It's really where you might create resources that define a given type of service request. You know, like if someone has this condition, then we'd suggest you do these tests. It's kind of like defining plan definitions and stuff. So we're not really covering definitions, but certainly requests. You'll see here is our service request that we've done a lot of work on. It's classified as a request type of resource. And then we have event type resources, of which task is one down here. And high level request is kind of like just the idea that someone wants something done. It doesn't manage the fulfillment of that thing being done. It's just a thing hanging in the sky that says someone wants this thing to be done, but it doesn't it doesn't define how it is done. And that's really what task comes in and does. So the workflow, the fulfillment of doing a service request is what task manages. In a fire sense, if you just have a service request, it kind of just hangs there like with no one to do it. It's just an order by someone to do something, but there's no frame about how to do it. And that's what task does. They have this workflow resource relationship here, shows you have a request based on an event. There's this definition thing, which we're not really going into, but it shows the relationship between request and event. I'm not going to read this whole page to you, but I advise reading it. What I will show you is these tabs. Trying to guide you through these because I forever get lost and not forget where these pages are. So workflow and then these tabs here are quite important. So there was an interesting part in here that talks about an example workflow state for a lab order for a blood test. Seems very relevant to what we're doing. So the following table shows the steps for a simple blood test order and the corresponding values of task attributes. A lot of the details of other attributes have been omitted in order to focus on the state changes. So I point this out again because it's kind of the fire spec telling us, you really should be using a task resource here. So provider orders a blood test for a patient, a service request, which we've spent a lot of time looking at, resources created to represent the order, and a task resource is created to represent the request to the lab. So here they're saying it's not just a service request, you need a task to tell someone to do the service request. Task based on points to the service request. So lab accepts the order, the patient is at the lab, the blood is drawn, Work on the blood sample is in progress. Preliminary results are available. Diagnostic report resource is created. The task output value references the diagnostic report resource. We're not getting that, that's right at it's getting quite advanced when we eventually get to reports one day, but it kind of shows that the task is that glue between doctors ask us to do something, the task manages us doing it, and the output of the task is what the doctor wanted in the end, the report. So it's kind of the glue between the request and the outcome of the request. I won't go through all this, but we'll say there's this list of patterns, which we will go through, and there's a set here. They are found here. So there's a set of diagrams that explain different options. So option B, option A, B, C, there's a whole lot of options, and there's more here, option F onwards. Option F is where we think we may arrive. But before we go into this, I want to now just switch to tasks, right? So I've sort of shown you a bit about FHIR workflow. Why do we think we need a task? Because the FHIR spec tells us a lot about using a task, and these are the pages that tell us that. If we just then jump to the service, the resource that is task. So here's all the resources. Here's our task. It's under workflow. So this is the task resource. It's there. I'm not going to go through all the properties of it, but coming up in the next couple of weeks, we are going to go through, like we did with service requests, we're going to go through a wave process of going through each of these and deciding whether we need them or not. I will go down to this state machine. So I think this is very visual and important. So this is the concrete state machine that FHIR gives us for how a task progresses. Remember, task is agnostic to diagnostic requesting. It's tasking anything to be done. So really, this is the developer, the technical workflow state machine. Task can come into existence and be requested, like the doctor's requested it. It can be in draft, just sits around. No one really does much in draft. It's just is a service request, is a task that is in draft, and then it gets requested, has to move through these arrows. It could be received by a lab or a radiology clinic. They could then decide whether they're going to accept that task or reject that task, or cancel that task. And then eventually it becomes in progress, which for pathology is probably when you collect the samples. For radiology, it's probably when patient arrives. It can be put on hold. It then gets completed, or it fails. And so FHIR gives us this state machine, and you can't change this state machine, right? But what is fundamental to understand is this is the technical state machine of how a task works. But we probably like to have some statuses that mean something in the pathology and radiology space, like collected, in lab, or arrived, image acquisition, and those are in the task, but they live as business statuses here. And this is just a codable concept, right? So we can just make up whatever statuses we like. That's probably part of our role at Spark. So the state machine here is that state machine I talked about. It doesn't change, but we can say, when the state is in progress, then probably the business status, at least for pathology, might be collected. And in radiology, it might be patient arrived. But that's for us to define. That's where we get our flexibility to create the whole lot of states in the workflow that mean something at a business sense. But this state machine, it doesn't really change. Any questions about that concept?
Angus, is it worthwhile just noting that the status change probably is going to be delegated to different actors? So who can change a status to what value at what time? This gives a partial ordering, obviously, on status changes, but it's not at the moment making any call on who makes that change, which is again something we need to say something about.
Absolutely, yeah. So FHIR's not telling us which actor moves a task to requested or in progress. That's for us to, start working out. It might be the placer makes it requested, but it's the lab who says it's accepted and in progress. We need to work through those things because FHIR doesn't tell us. But that's a good segue back to the workflows.
Oh, Angus, Tailwinder's
Yep.
got his hand.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, Tailwinder.
And I know we are talking about tasks. When the order is being generated, it's in a requested status. What about the service request? It's going to be draft or active?
Yep. So I've got service request here. So I think you're talking about this status on service request here, draft, active, on hold.
Yeah.
Yep. So we need to make these decisions, but I think it would probably be an active service request that it has an intent of order. That's but we need to define those things. I think in our ways we left. I don't know if we locked this down to active and in order. Can't remember, but certainly I know from my experience,
I think
a lab, the fulfillment side of the equation really doesn't want to fulfill something that isn't active. Like if it's draft, I don't care. If it's on hold, maybe I don't care. Revoked, completed. I'm really looking for stuff that's active, and I'm looking for service requests that are ordered, not proposed or planned or directive. But agree, we need to lock them in, and in a way, there I can see a sort of map, and I sort of have one myself, which is, when this task is requested, I expect the service request to be active and ordered, intent of order. Because I wouldn't want to act on a task that's requested if the service request is draft, right? And I agree, there are probably some rules about workflow we have to start defining.
Yeah, I have big thoughts on that, but probably contradicted to this. What my thought is, the orders that we are generating are future orders and not actually the active orders or the orders that you can act upon. Only you can act upon when you have the patients, right? The task is requested, and once filler claim that order, the status changed to active for a service request, and that makes it that this is already being claimed and being in process, because the service request can't let you know whether it's in process or not from the point it is being claimed onwards. So this is just where I'm thinking, keeping it as draft when it is ordered and then making it active on the claim, and then everything managed through the task.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that view. I guess one way I look at it, wrongly or rightly, and we're here to all debate this, is I see the service request as this sort of immutable object from the doctor. He's saying, I want this thing done. The lab doesn't change that, right? The lab can't change what the doctor wanted. And so I sort of disagree with the service request being draft and moving to active, because that's not the lab's job to decide whether the doctor's order is active or draft. It's the lab's job to do fulfillment, and that's about task. So I like this clean separation, and it seems to be holding true, which is service request is the placer's responsibility, right? Almost immutable by anyone but the placer. Task is the fulfiller's responsibility, and they update statuses there. I'll go to the other questions, maybe. Heath?
Just a comment, and I think you've kind of alluded to it your summary at the end there. It's the service request. If you go back to the definition of it, it's more around the authorization of something to be done. And that's what the place is doing, is authorizing it for it to be done, for it to be paid, all those sorts of things. So as soon as he's actually, equivalent to the print button in nowadays, that is now active. Then the next step is to say, okay, I'm requesting for this to be done by some person, and that's the task. So they're completely independent state models. One is around the authorization, and if you think about expiry and all those sorts of things, or cancellation from a placer's perspective, that's the state model around the service request. The task is the state model around fulfillment. So I'm requesting fulfillment, and then it hands over to the filler to say, I am in progress in this fulfillment, or I accept this fulfillment, etc. So very independent. And that you can have a look at the number of states on that service request as well. They're very minimal. It's either active, or it's been revoked, or it's been completed, those sorts of things. So it really comes down to the placer is in control of that service request, and the filler, I see it as a shared resource, a shared state, but primarily the filler.
There are those status. It's interesting. Draft says the request has been created, but is not yet complete or ready for action. It's not ready for action. So it's the doctor just fiddling with it until the doctor says it's active. I want this done by someone.
Yeah.
So
the authorization. So once it's active, it's now been authorized. And I wouldn't even, from an exchange perspective, I wouldn't even see us exchanging a draft.
Agree. I'll go to Andy, I think. You're on mute, Andy.
I was just going to say I guess a note is to say that some of the R5 descriptions of these are a little more thought out than the R4 descriptions of some of these concepts. If you are looking at things, the second point is I agree with everything that both Heath and Angus have said about the mutual kind of roles of service request and task. But of course, we do need to come up with some, I think, clarifications around these, because you can, for instance, read into this, or read the spec, and it does talk about fillers modifying service requests, which I think is not actually what we want to do. So we are going to have to come up with some more consistent interpretation of this to avoid, I think, this confusion that might come out of it. The other thing that you haven't mentioned yet, Angus, is status reason, and probably just noting that status, business status, and status reason all have a role to play in this. And back at that originally example of workflow description that you showed, where those three were all in play, do have to remember when states do get changed, that status reasons need to be reset, and business statuses probably need to be reset as well, going through that. And the other thing is that there are some things in this that we can enforce in validation through the implementation guide, and there are some things that is not as easy, or at the moment cannot be enforced. So for instance, we can certainly put rules in around, if you're updating the status on a task, then its associated service request must be in this state. That's easy for us to do. What is not so easy to do is to say, you can only move basically a task in the workflow according to that, that positioning of the relative statuses. So you can't, for instance, move a, let's say, an in progress, you can't move that back to received, for instance. I don't know an easy way of doing that in the IG, as opposed to this fixed view of the current data you're trying to create.
I thought I'd just show this state machine. So this is my own documentation internal at Sonic, and it has what we were just talking about. You can see it's the same task state machine, but you can see I've overlaid it with task status draft, business status draft, service request staff, requested, active, active. So you can see, at least me personally, I have mapped out what is the service request status when the business status is this and the task status is that. So I certainly have that mental model in my mind. I'll point out what Andy said about status reason, because it's very important. So can put a code, and remember a codable concept, and remember a codable concept can have just a text string on it. So this is a fantastic property to say, it's in this status because of this reason. And primarily where we've used that a lot is when the status is like rejected, or, you know, some sort of negative connotation, like, oh, we're not doing it for some reason. We've used status reason to explain why. So like a data problem where, God forbid, our order placer does something which we think is invalid, we reject the order, and we put in here, we're rejecting it because you didn't set a patient on the service request reference or something, you know, like, so it's the way we communicate back. It's a bit like in HL7 getting a negative ACK, and there's a message to tell you why it was rejected. So we certainly use it in that way. I'll go to, I think Brett was first.
I don't know. I think Heath was first.
Heath then.
No, I just didn't take down.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I was just going to point out, and I think there's obviously a lot of discussion to happen, but it would be really good, because obviously we're going to go through this, you know, in terms of which elements are priorities or needed to do the business. So that's something to think about. But we do now have some active definitions, and so whilst we're going through this process, it would be good to think about obligations. For, you know, which actors have what obligations around these elements. Do we need to expand the definition of the actors in terms of how they manage status reporting or other things, right? You know, and you know, what in terms of their responsibilities in this process, or do we need more actors that are covering off some of this, you know, the things that we want to achieve? So, you know, that's all something kind of as an overlay. And since we've gone through this with the service request model, we do have some existing actors. So you might think about, do these actors play, you know, are they part of this? Or do you want to split these actor definitions into, you know, stuff around actually filling and things around status management, right? These are all different options that we can kind of think about. I think that's worth just pointing out. So we will have to work through that stuff. And it also comes down to, you know, in some ways defining obligations in terms of responsibility and updating certain elements and things like that. So it's, yeah. So I think we should have the tools, but we'll have to work through that.
Thanks, Brett. So I can sort of dovetailing to that, if we go back to these workflow management patterns, and again, because I always get lost, it's in documentation, via workflow, and these tabs up here. So if you look at, so this is FHIR presenting to us a whole lot of options about how one may interplay between two parties or more to pass stuff around. You know, it starts at the very simplest, which is, I'm not going to go through them all, but I'll cover the simplest just so you get the idea. You know, a placer makes a RESTful call to create or update a record or a post to invoke an operation. The receiver responds with a 200 OK, indicating whether the request was received, processed or not, and if appropriate, provides a response back. The simplest of all workflows. The placer knows whether the request was accepted or not, and knows when the task has been done. So that's kind of like what we do with V2 messaging, right? We send a message to someone, and they send us an acknowledgement back that says, "Yeah, I've got it," or "No, I didn't like it," and that's it. That's all that happens, right? So that's kind of like the most basic one. The one that that the co-chairs like the look of is this option F, or at least what some of us have actually done in the past. And so I want to walk through this one, so just so you understand it. So you've got your placer system, and you've got a filler system or a FHIR server. So they're creating a request, like a service request, into their FHIR server. The doctor's placed an order, service request goes into their FHIR server. They then create a task resource into their FHIR server, presumably pointing to that request. The filler either is polled or notified or has a subscription, but has some mechanism that makes them aware that this task now exists, right? Now they say poll notify, you could poll, you could create subscriptions. Then the filler goes and gets that task. Then they put a claim to that task, like changing the task status to received or accepted or something. They then act accordingly, do their work, do the lab work, do the radiology work. In the middle of acting accordingly, they're updating the task, saying, oh, the lab patient's arrived, it's collected, image acquisition, whatever those things are. This person, in response to those, can do whatever they want to do. Oh, the patient's arrived, I better tell the doctor. I'm not suggesting you do, but they can see those statuses change. And then really this sort of goes into like a report being created. So create an event, mark the task as completed. And this event is kind of like the reverse, right? Like the filler now creating a task to say, hey, I've got this diagnostic report here for you, and your task is complete. And then these guys go and get that event, which is go get the diagnostic report, and then they update their request, the service request from the beginning, to completed. Right? So some of us are fond with this one, but there's others, and I don't know if I want to go through all of them. I've got a bit of time left, but there's others. So I'd encourage people to walk through this page and look at these options, simply to skill yourself up on the possibilities so that we can have the discussion with knowledge. Some of them don't have diagrams, some do, but there is, numerous ways to cut and slice this. But I do feel, I think others would be the same, that sticking to one of these options as best we can, I'm sure we'll put tweaks and modifications on it, but I think it would be good that we arrive at some sort of position that we loosely all accept. We're going to try and do option F, or we're going to try and do option G, and maybe not we're going to try and do option Z that we just make up. Even if we do make up option Z, it should be kind of based in option F or one of the other ones. I think just to stay in the guardrails of what FHIR thinks, what it suggests, and what it designs its resources around is the safe place for us to be. If we go too far out on our own limb, then we're doing stuff that FHIR didn't really understand or intend. Brett, did you still have a question?
Yeah, I'm probably going to poke the bear along the way with some of these things, because I think there's some consequences of having placer created tasks and things like that, in terms of authorization and management of those resources. So I think we'll work through some of that, but it's also what's the advantage of having an undirected task, and what's it for? Because there's other ways to direct service requests. I mean, you can specify a performer in service request, which is your desired performer, right? Which is effectively directing that request. So there's questions along the way, and I think I'll probably raise those because that's not what this pattern is, right? So alternative patterns are not to create the task up front. Let fillers create the task when the task is actually executed, right? So but that creates other requirements in terms of multiple fillers creating tasks and things like that. But it's also there's a whole set of business rules that would need to get implemented around some of this too. So the question is, who is responsible for managing those business rules, and how does it happen, right? So these are all things that we have to work through. But I'm just saying we'll go through that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is probably one of the more challenging parts of what we're going to do is formalizing what this flow is going to be. So yeah, don't feel I'm trying to jam it down your throat now. It's we've got lots of discussion to have through these. But my view is the closer we can stay to one of these designated options, the safer we'll be. But yeah, it's not as simple as just going, it's not the square peg. It's not as easy as putting the square peg in the square hole. Heath, sorry, you had a question?
Yeah, it's somewhere in between the two of what Brett and yourself are talking about. I'm just wondering, is this seems like a solution architecture we're starting to get to, and we don't necessarily know what the solution architecture is going to be. Are we actually going to be dictating a solution architecture in this implementation guide? And I'm thinking that whether we get there or not is one thing. Is that the current activity, the next step? I don't think so. I think what we need to be taking these workflows into consideration whilst developing the data model or the profile for task, and ensuring that that the implementation guide is able to support potentially more than one workflow option. And then it's maybe another iteration, whether it's a release 2 or not even our job to come up with what is the actual solution workflow option.
It is tricky. I think it's tricky because there's like, because if I say we're not going to have placer created tasks, I no longer need a placer interaction or obligations other than read, right? I need to be able to read that back. So these are like big ticket decisions in terms of, because it's whether you're going to place obligations on the placer to have this capability, right? And so I think part of that is, that's a good question, right? Because if you say that's not what a placer needs to do, or it's some other entity's responsibility to create that undirected task or tasks in general, that's an architectural decision that you've made, and now it's changed the placer's kind of role.
But if we've got use cases that one is an undirected and one is a directed, then as a overall, we need to support both use cases.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're right. There is certainly a question around, in an undirected, is it the responsibility of the placer to create that undirected task, or is it the filler who claims the request? That's an interesting conversation, but in the end, we've got to find an IG or have a profile that is able to support both. And I think by supporting the first two use cases, we actually have an IG that supports both. So again, nice theoretical conversations to be had, but we just need to think about what is the scope of this IG, at least for this release 1, and not get too bogged down into a solution architecture.
I think it's critical as we start walking through tasks. Like if we're going to start walking through tasks and defining must supports and better, it's inevitable that you need to know why. And I'm not saying you have to arrive on one of these, but you kind of need to understand the possibilities of these workflows in order to have the conversation about tasks. Because I worry that as we talk about tasks, you can't just talk about it in the abstract of a workflow, because literally is a task or a workflow. I don't want to define the workflow before, but I feel like that you're going to be going a bit back and forth between them.
And that's what I'm alluding to, is I think we use this one and perhaps some other possible options as the scenario, but probably, if anything, coming back to our use cases to ensure that we're supporting our use cases.
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, isn't it? We have requirements. We have to meet those requirements.
Could I just drop in there? We need to wrap this discussion up. Angus, Andy, did you have any closing remarks for today?
I had one more slide I wanted to show. So I was just going to show this slide, just driving in again, that task sits between service request and like an owner, or maybe in an undirected scenario, there is no owner, it's just a task, but there's no one to do it yet, still to be debated. And then just to this extrapolation that we've also mused about and discussed, which is in Australia, Remember, a service request is only one item, like one full blood count. You can't have full blood count and liver function in one service request, right? So we inevitably in Australia get caught in this situation where one request by a doctor tends to be multiple service requests, right? And so each service request would have its pigeon pair task. And now you've got a set of tasks, but we intend to process the tasks as a group. They have a group identifier on them. And then so we had conversation about there being a group task. So it's like a parent task to the child tasks. We also then have had discussions about a group service request, which is a parent to the service request. And this might be somewhere to store data that is per request, not per request item. Like a patient is HIV positive, right? It's got nothing to do with any one of the tests. It's something about the whole request. So not saying this, so we had this mental mind map of this sort of synergy balanced thing that is a group service request has a group task, it has children, tasks have items. Not saying that's concrete, but this idea too was something that we need to thrash through when we start talking about tasks. I think that's all I had.
Great. All right, that's really interesting introduction tasks going forward, and look forward. Just need to
we're losing Chris. We're losing you, Chris. Your internet's very poor. You're coming through like a stuttering robot. That's better. Try now. It sounds like it's better. Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Yeah, you got me?
All right.
Yeah, I thought it was my connection. It was your connection. So this is just the upcoming dates. We've got what's coming up. So ballot comments open, and that's the period from 12th of August through to the 8th of September. Next week's a bit different week for us. So next week we've got the HL7 AU workgroup meeting day. That's in Brisbane on Tuesday. So during that, we're actually got 3 sessions allocated for eRequesting TDG. So it's 11:15, 1:15, and 3:15. So that's hybrid. So if you're not there on the day, you can absolutely still participate. It won't be through our normal Zoom links. They'll actually be Teams links, which hopefully everyone in the TDG has received an invite to that, which includes the links. And then we've got on the 21st and 22nd, we've got connectathon, which has an eRequesting track in it as well. And then we've got regular TDGs the following weeks after that. So just jump to the next one. So this is the workgroup meeting day that's next Tuesday. And in the middle there are our 3 eRequesting TDG meetings. We're an hour and a half session at 11:15. We've got some lunch and an hour and a half session at 1:15. And then we've reserved a 3rd session at the end of the day there from 3:15 to 4:30 if we need it, which we may do. So the intent of these sessions is to work through the decision making for task. So Angus has given us a bit of an overview and some homework to do to go and sort of get our head around that. And the idea is we want to use these sessions to get through decision making for task. The intent is to do it the same as we did before Service Crest, to do some waves. So we incrementally build it up and build it out. And having this day sort of dedicated for us, hopefully it means we can get a long way through task, which will make eRequesting a lot more usable moving forward. So like I said, these are Teams meetings, they're not Zoom meetings. So there's links there. Chris has put it in the chat as well to the day. So if you're not there on the day, you absolutely come along or join the calls and participate and vote and let's develop our task. The next one is just the connectathon, which is the day after, on the 21st of August. The first day, we've got a couple of breakout sessions as well. We've got on the eRequesting pathology and radiology terminology value sets. We've got another one on some advanced topics that Heath's going to run. Otherwise, we're going to be doing things like creating service requests and testing them out. And moving on to day 2 is on the next one, Chris. More testing and another breakout session for advanced topics on task and potentially group if we get that far. And just a feedback on the eRequesting terminology so we can gather some feedback on whether it's working, what we need moving forward. So that's a summary of next week. Make sure, like I said, Tuesday is a really important day for getting through tasks. So if you can join us, that would be absolutely great, either there on the day or in the call.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. And that wraps us up with a minute to go. So yes, Danielle.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to ask, will there be any like pre-meeting slides or anything for that work group meeting day coming around?
We're still working through those.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Looks like we're done for today. Hope you enjoy the connectathon or working group if you're going, and if not, we'll see you at the next meeting. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.